going to do a countdown and then we're going to get going. So,
All right.
3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Anonymous Shakespeare. We are back again today, examining the circumstances around the creation of Shakespeare's famous plays. And one of the interesting things that we found so far in looking at this, one of the things that has come back again and again to us as we have these conversations, is how fascinating it is to see the political sort of background against which these plays were set. And a couple of weeks ago, we had a look at an article by George Bernard Shaw commenting on Leo Tolstoy's opinion of Shakespeare. And that has brought us to a more in-depth look at George Bernard Shaw himself. So today, the title rather, of this episode is Staging Caesar, Shaw's Spin on Shakespeare. So we're going to delve a little bit into Shaw's version of the Shakespeare play. He wrote a very interesting little play called Caesar and Cleopatra, which shows Caesar in a completely different light to the way that Shakespeare portrayed Caesar. So we're going to have a little look at that and see what we can draw out of that discussion. So joining me today for this conversation is, of course, our old friend, Otto X on Minds.com, who is from Navakavada Buddhism. So, hey, Otto, how are you doing?
Oh, not bad. How are you tonight?
Well, pretty good. It's fairly cold here. Not as cold as you, I'm sure.
That's warming up a bit. Spring's on
Is
the way
it?
up here.
Spring's on the way, as we descend. And a little bit later on, Roger Hansen will be joining us from Roger Hansen Live.
I'm back.
But, oh, you're back. Hey, Roger, how are you doing? That was...
I'm sorry.
Roger has joined us.
I should have said something. I'm back.
You're back. Okay, we're here. We're all on board, so we're going to get going. So also we have some viewers here with us today, so thank you very much for being here. It's great having you back with us. And please remember that if you have any questions, pop them into the live chat. We will be monitoring it as we go along, and we will answer your questions as we go through. All right, so to get started, I was going to invite you, Otto, to please give us a little bit of a rundown on George Bernard Shaw, because he had an agenda with what he did, didn't he?
Well, yeah. Shaw is a very interesting guy and a good writer. I enjoy his work a great deal. He was technically Irish, although not really all that Irish. He was actually of English descent, part of the so-called Protestant ascendancy in Ireland. Perhaps that gave him a little bit of guilt. I don't know. But he was an early member of the Fabian Society, and he was a very, very enthusiastic member of the Fabians. The Fabians had this idea that you could make the best way to make changes in society is through long-term cultural changes, and this can be achieved through cultural presentations, books, art, painting, drama, of course later on television and movies. And the idea is that you would slowly inculcate certain ideas into society. Certain ideas would be shown in the course of the drama to be good. Other ideas would always be associated with failure and evil and so forth and so on. To be fair, he was, even as a Fabian, he was still something of a rebel. He always was somebody that liked to question things, and eventually he really was born less and less of a Fabian. I think by the 20s, he basically, and in the 1920s, there were a lot of political changes happening in Europe very, very rapidly. And I think it was difficult for him to still be talking about a gradualist position when you had many societies being transformed overnight. in Europe in the 1920s and 30s. Italy stands right out under Mussolini. Spain, Germany, Romania. Um, a lot of rapid political change, which was at the time seen as all for the good. Mussolini made the trains run on time. Hitler got the German economy back on its feet in a very short time, while all the countries around him were still floundering in the Depression. So he more and more spoke out in favor of like hardline authoritarian kind of rule. He apparently expressed admiration for both Mussolini and Stalin, both of whom made massive changes possible in their country. You can argue whether that was change for the good or bad, but at the time, people wanted change, and so yeah, but he always had an agenda. Anything that he wrote, and I think in the play Julius Caesar, one of the things he had in mind was pushing his ideas of thought and morality and of philosophy. And this seems to me to be derived to a great extent from his reading of Friedrich Nietzsche, the idea of the person who is a Superman, or working towards Nietzsche's idea of the Superman, someone who was beyond the slave morality, as he called it, of the tribe, but rather had a higher morality, a morality, for example, and this is shown in Shaw's Caesar a great deal, a morality beyond resentment, a very realistic, eyes open sort of a thing. But this, of course, was a projection on Shaw's part on the character. And the character is very, very different from the way Julius Caesar was described in Shakespeare's play. And I think Shakespeare's Caesar, I think we probably find a little more realistic and more relatable to in a lot of ways. And of course, Shakespeare was trying to follow Plutarch and other historians that he had access to at the time. So, but yeah, Shaw, he was quite the character, though. He was what we would call a character.
Yes,
being one. He really liked being one.
Right. I read earlier in that thing that you sent me that the Fabian Society, that was founded in 1884, was named after the Roman general Fabius Maximus.
Yes.
I thought that was really interesting, this Roman connection. They
love Romans.
Yes. Why does everybody love Romans, Otto?
Well, and when we look backward in our history, they were the guys that actually first achieved the thing that everybody's wanted to do ever since, which is unite Europe under a relatively peaceful, although that's arguable, Copenhagen. And of course, when I say Europe, I mean right up to the Rhine, anyway. And I forget who said it, that civilization stops at the Rhine. It's not a very good thing to Germans, but and of course, a lot of our subsequent political theory descends from Rome. The Roman Catholic Church, for example, operates. Its raison d'etre politically is the donation of Constantine. At least last I checked. I'm not an expert on this, but they count direct descent from the Roman Empire. I mean, a Roman Catholic diocese is no more than an imperial Roman tax district. And of course, I remember reading, I think it was prepared by John Dee. I should dig around to see if I can find it, but it was basically a document which was legitimizing Elizabeth I's rule. She was kind of shaky on the throne. According to the Habsburgs and to Roman Catholics, she wasn't the rightful heir. And he had written out this basically position paper which demonstrated that ultimately her authority derived from, guess what, the Roman Empire. And thus, I've gone on about before, the popularity of eagles as an emblem for groups such as, gosh, they're pretty obvious about it, like the Holy Roman Empire. That's a pretty obvious connection there. And right. As well as, Germany, Poland, Syria, because the Romans were everywhere. The United States, there was a lot of French eagle iconography, of course, with the First and Second Empires, obviously. They made very close connections. If you see paintings of Napoleon, he wore like a little golden wreath like the Roman emperors did of old. And just the title emperor itself, really, properly speaking, that is a Roman military title. Imperator basically meant field marshal or army commander. And it eventually evolved into the executive title for what's properly called the Principate, the Princeps, Prince, the first citizen. In fact, we know at the time that a king as a title was regarded as higher than that. You know, Caesar, yeah, all these guys, they're interchangeable at a certain point. But Caesar, as is pointed out in the play by Shakespeare, was tempted for the crown. He wanted the crown of a king. He saw that as a higher honor than being dictator for life, which he was, or having the imperial crown, which was, again, at one time, imperator or emperor was simply a military title for somebody who was extremely victorious. Your troops could vote you an imperator, and then you would have the so-called triumph. But this title was later restricted to the ruler, and then it became a title for the ruler, and in fact a title higher than that of king. But somebody like Julius Caesar, for him, that was one of the aspects of the play. That's what tempted him out to go and get murdered, was, they might be offering you the crown. You can wear it anywhere except in the Italian peninsula. And he's like,
wow.
So.
Wow. So, Roger, you're also really interested in history, and you know a lot about this period and everything. What's your take on the Roman Empire, and why you think these writers, these playwrights, set their message within the Roman Empire?
Well, for me, I really am big on history and everything, and don't get me wrong, I do have a YouTube channel called the Praetorians. Okay, when I say this, but I hate the Romans. I hate the Romans, and I am completely amazed with Europe and how idiotic they are when it comes to the Romans. They set them up on this platform where they were just so great. I mean, this was Gaul. You know what I mean? People died because the Romans were invaders and invaded their countries, and there was a lot of massacres from both sides over it. You know what I mean? And all of that was completely forgotten. And hundreds of years later, they're idolizing these guys. You know what I mean? They're setting up, or actually, they're keeping Roman architecture in the cities, like in Paris and London. They've got those arches, and it just it amazes me how these people do that. You know what I mean? They were Gaul, they were being invaded. The Romans were taking their citizens or the people within their communities as slaves so that they could fight for them and work for the Roman Empire, and this wasn't an option. You had to give up a certain amount of the people within your community to pay tribute to the Romans, and that's what they did with every community they went to. So it's just amazing to me when I actually hear stuff like that, and this is a really, really good example of my stance on that. You know what I mean? Because don't get me wrong, he is a pretty good writer and everything, but the way that he portrays Shaw portrays Julius Caesar is just insane. He makes him out to be like the symbol of humanity at its highest development. You know what I mean? And there was a lot worse when it came to rulers of the Roman Empire. You know what I mean? Don't get me wrong. But he created it. He was the start of all of it. And it just that's the one thing about the Roman Empire that just drives me nuts when it comes to that.
Yeah.
You can tell that he had a lot of influence from Nietzsche. That's another thing that I did notice. He was really up on Nietzschean philosophy, and Nietzsche was big on Zoroastrianism. So if you take away the the vilification of all that when it comes to World War II and the Nazis and stuff like that, you start to see that there's like a lot of Indo-European aspects coming out of that, and I just don't agree with the idea of making Caesar into as great of a person as what Shaw made him out to be, you know. So that's my take on it.
It's very fascinating that Caesar is so idealized by, well, in this instance, with this conversation, by both Shaw and Shakespeare. They both create their own Caesar. And it's fascinating that they would do that they would depict Caesar as a symbol of humanity at its highest development. Why do you think they did that, Otto? Do you think that he was an extraordinary man to be able to unite Europe in that way?
Well, you know, as Roger points out, for the people at the time, being conquered by the Roman Empire was not a fun thing.
Yeah.
And they usually resisted to the utmost. Of course, their descendants, after hundreds of years of Roman rule, come to accept things, and you could call it Stockholm syndrome if you like. In Ireland, the liberation of Ireland from the yoke of Great Britain, England, took a long time, and it was difficult. I've read books from the period on both the Unionist and Republican side of people writing, and the amount of real they had to do a lot to really dislodge people from being not even so much supportive of the crown, but of being indifferent to it, of just accepting it. And the IRA used to go to extraordinary lengths. There was all sorts of punishment, killings, really what are arguably terrorism against their own people, to, for example, enforce these so-called boycotts. You can see the boycotts are presented in Ireland as like, well, somebody's like dealing with the British. Everyone is just like peacefully turns their back on them or refuses to do business. But in fact, these boycotts were enforced. And, I've read accounts from the other side that were contemporaries saying, people were boycotted because they were frightened to even talk to people who were on boycott, because they would be visited later and they might have a punishment beating or a punishment shooting or a punishment maiming of some sort. So there was a concerted effort to drive out, and it would be the same thing with European countries with Rome, because they just, Rome was looked back on as such a wonderful thing. And keep in mind too, people were looking at Rome through the lens of nostalgia. And I forget who said it, who says nostalgia is very stupid, because nostalgia always leaves out the unpleasant parts and magnifies unrealistically pleasant parts. And people in Europe after the Roman Empire was over, people who were involved in things like the 30 Years' War, people who were involved in all of these terrible situations that simply didn't exist under the empire. Well, maybe the empire wasn't that great, but at least we wouldn't be having the 30 Years' War kind of deal. They were wars, certainly, and they always talk about the Pax Romana, but indeed the Pax Romana was a case of very small-scale revolts happening almost constantly throughout the empire, and constant expansion whenever the Romans somebody had some gold or other resources they might like. That's why they invaded Dacia. That's why they originally went up into Gaul. In part had to do with control of the resources, including gold. Although there's another interesting aspect of the Roman expansion into Gaul and Hispania. There was at that time that the Celts were being squeezed between the Romans in the south and the Germans in the north and the east, and both were emerging powers. Both were like pushing their way into Europe, and the Gauls knew they couldn't fight them both off, and they'd have to basically align themselves one way or the other. And I thought this was an interesting theory, but they said when you look at when push came to shove, the Germans had beer And the Gauls already had beer, but the Romans had wine. And wine was an incredibly important part of the Celtic economy at that time, because they loved the wine, and you could only get it at that time through the Romans or the Greek merchants that the Romans controlled. And they weren't growing any wine in Europe. And I mean, the price for an amphora of wine was one slave by the time it got up into northern Gaul. That a human slave was like buying an automobile, a brand new car today. So that's an amazing markup on a jug of wine. It's a kind of drug dealing. So there was a huge economic interest in Rome taking control of this area, and there were Celtic people that were profiting from this as well. And so there was a certain group within the Celtic lands, a merchant class and a small landowning class, that really wanted the Romans to come in because it would cement their power, but of course it would break down the traditional society, break down the traditional powers. And but that's kind of off the subject. Why they wrote about Caesar? Well, I think that Shakespeare wrote about Caesar because people were interested in the Romans, even in the Elizabethan era. Caesar was seen as a heroic figure. This was at a very violent time. This was a time when your country depended on how good a general you had in the field. And again, the idea of Caesar, at least in the popular mind, was this guy that always won, and he was this great military leader. Of course, again, that's nostalgia. We don't look at, Shaw kind of touches on the atrocities when he had all the right hands chopped off of the people in this one surrendered place and had Vercingetorix slaughtered on the altar of Mars. But it wasn't really a human sacrifice.
Yeah.
A human sacrifice. Only druids do human sacrifice.
Yeah.
Just the altar of Mars. That's all. So, and as far as Shaw goes, he was just trying to, again, Caesar's always, he's almost an archetype. He's almost a meme. And I think he was also trying to one-up Shakespeare, because that was just Shaw. He would be a troublemaker.
Right.
Now, can I ask you a question now, or can I ask you to kind of explain something when it comes to Shaw and how he the four political murders in the play? Is there a way you could kind of give a little bit of a storyline on how that plays out and what you think of it?
Who, me?
Yeah.
Well, I think Shaw's main point with all the killings that occur has to do with his presentation of master versus slave morality, the whole Nietzschean thing. At the very end, at the very last murder there of what's her name, the one that they keep making fun of because nobody could pronounce her name and I can't pronounce her.
Taratita.
Yeah.
What was that again?
I found that kind of unconvincing in some ways, because when Rufio was basically like, well, I did it, without any kind of anger, without resentment, without revenge, but I just did away with her because she was a dangerous animal. I think he compared her to like a lion if Caesar was out lion hunting, and sort of thing. And this was seen as Caesar found it acceptable, and yet when the head of what's his name was chopped off, Pompey. Was it Pompey's head got chopped off?
Pompey, yes.
And they present him the head, and they're telling, well, look, we did it. You didn't order this, so you get your revenge, and you get, this political. Now we know from history, and Caesar kind of covered this too. In his, I'm not sure whether he didn't cover it in Julius Caesar, but he covered it in Antony and Cleopatra. The whole, the disgust of Caesar with this, but this was my buddy, this was my friend, part of me is saying, yeah, just slaughter each other's, men down in the infantry guys, that's fine, cut their throats all day, but this was a Roman general and we would have captured him and ransomed him. I think in Shakespeare there was, and certainly in Plutarch and in the contemporary sources about Caesar, there was question about how sincere Caesar was about that. Just the whole, he made a big show of like, I never would have ordered him murdered, but that was easy enough to do, and Nero was known for doing the same thing. We don't know. I mean, Caesar was obviously no demigod. He was no great hero. He was an Italian politician who played for keeps and who was very realistic, very realistic. Now, when Cleopatra ordered that murder, that was what was his name there that insulted her?
Ponitus or something,
Yeah,
was he?
yeah. And when she was, explaining why she had him killed, the biggest reason was, well, because, he insulted me. That was a wonderful scene with that actress who was made up to look like Elizabeth Taylor. That was, I think, not only was Caesar, Shaw had Caesar, showing how this is the morally inferior, the slave morality, if you like, kind of an attitude, but it had the worst political consequences because the unruly mob, she's like, well, and I'm sure Shaw did this deliberately, well, if anybody in the city would think that I was in the wrong, I'll have myself crucified, by my own slaves or something like that. And of course, she only meant the right kind of people, like the people in that room. Whereas outside, there's thousands of people that are really PO'd that she did that.
Yeah.
His partisans. And so that there was Shaw trying to give the lesson of sometimes political expediency and doing the right thing go hand in hand, and they always should. Now, unfortunately, that's not always the case. But people like Shaw like to present that as, it's a way to encourage people that ultimately, as long as you do make the right, skillful decision, you'll come out on top. But that gets back into the idea of like, no, you can't go into samsara and say, well, I'm so pure the samsara won't stick to me. It will. When you're playing politics like that in a brutal world, it's unfortunate, but you are driven to brutal means. And so Caesar has all those hands cut off and Vercingetorix killed. And the real Caesar didn't think twice about that. That was just policy at the time. Right up through modern times. What's his name there? Tamerlane would make pyramids of human skulls. And I think the hand cutting off, I've seen that with other rulers, it was a way of doing a bounty. It's like, I wonder how many people that we captured. Well, just chop something off of each of them that's unique kind of deal. So they didn't have much of a feeling about, we're very squeamish about stuff that the ancients really didn't think twice about. And again, a lot of that is we're so protected from these things. These are people that saw death every day and birth too. And when somebody gives birth in your house, and then you've also got, your older relatives dying in your house, and you've got everything happening in between, all your hospital work, every illness happens right in front of you. People live their whole lives with each other. It wasn't, we hide so much of our lives away.
Shaw really shows Caesar as a philosopher more than a soldier, I think, in his play. Don't you? He doesn't come across very well. The main role in Shaw's play is not for him to depict a soldier, a fighting man, but a forgiving man, a loving, rational, kind, diplomatic guy.
He's using Caesar as his mouthpiece, just like Plato used Socrates. The Caesar, again, this gets back to Shaw wanting to use his plays as teaching tools. So he's going to create a character that is less about, the realistic historical character and more about someone that's going to talk about what Shaw wants to talk about to the audience and present a certain way of life to the audience as being the best way to go. So he's going to be showing this is his model of a Nietzschean new man, like you say, a philosopher, and the way we should all be thinking instead of all these people that are all like, he had not a great deal of respect for the canned education that most people got. How did he put it? You compulsorily educated ones,
Yes. When we looked at Tolstoy, it was really interesting to me how much Tolstoy hated Shakespeare. And when I read Bernard Shaw's play, I was interested in how Shaw revered Shakespeare. That was quite interesting that even though Shaw decided to write a different Caesar, he still was able to acknowledge Shakespeare's genius, whoever Shakespeare was. It's
Right,
genius.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was like an homage.
I think one thing that stuck out to me, the reason why I put it in my talking points, was Casca.
Yes.
That's probably something that really influenced Shaw, because, like, for me with Cleopatra, that would be more political maneuverability for me than anything else. Of course, Caesar can have Cleopatra order for the murder, you know what I mean? And it would take all the pressure off of him, because it wasn't him who did it, it was Cleopatra, So
Right.
that's how I would see it in reality. But I get what Otto's saying too, he's trying to present a story. He had an agenda, like he said at the beginning, so what you would read there wouldn't be in reality Caesar, just like Shakespeare's reality of Caesar was completely wrong too. You know what I mean? Because, I mean, to be honest, nobody really knows what Shakespeare's personality was. I mean, I mean Caesar. You know what I mean? So you're basically guessing on it, unless somebody has some secrets we don't know about.
What do you think of Shakespeare's depiction of Caesar, Roger?
Well, for me, like he it's really the whole way that he's being portrayed, or Casca is being portrayed in the whole thing. That's the important thing for me. Now, he for me, I feel like he's being portrayed like as an ambiguous person. You know what I mean? It brings out both of his weaknesses and his strengths, as well as like noble qualities, which I don't personally feel that he had noble qualities, or you know what I mean, when it comes to a lot of the things he did. And like whenever he portrays him as like, being deluding himself in his last moments, with Casca and everything, it makes it out like he resembles a man who loves to delude himself, and others, and making them think that he embodies like being selfless and constant service of the state and everything like that. And I don't believe that that's the way it was, because a lot of the things that took place during the time of the Romans with these people was all about maneuverability in politics. You know what I mean? Like Caesar couldn't just go out and freaking slaughter an entire village. You know what I mean? Or an entire city or anything like that. He had all these senators. He had all of these nobles. He had people that he had to account for. So it was a lot of moving, negotiating, things of that nature. So you had to be pretty much a snake in the grass.
So is what you're saying that you think that Casca's opinion is a more realistic depiction of Caesar than Shakespeare's sort of opinion of Caesar?
Well, I think in Caesar's last moments, that was probably the best of it. And for me, I think it was. Especially, the part where he likes to delude himself. You know what I mean? I do believe that. I couldn't see any Roman not deluding themselves. You know what I mean? And
Right.
making themselves out to be all noble, you know, and a servant to the people and things of that
Mm.
nature. That would kind of come with the whole responsibility. You know what I mean? But that's the part that I agree with. Now, the thing about Casca that really interests me is like nobody liked Casca whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Not even the people who were a party with the assassination. Okay, the participants, that they didn't even like him.
Mm-hmm.
They discarded
Mm-hmm.
him. You know, uh, or they didn't like him. Period. They considered him like foolish, and they also thought of him more of as a follower than as a leader. But he's also the first one of the senators to actually, you know, kill or stab frickin' Caesar. So
Mm.
that
Mm.
that makes me wonder, and a lot of people say it's because frickin' they didn't estimate what his convictions were. You know what I mean? They must have been stronger than what the other characters believed it to be. But for me, I kind of wonder about that because, you know, he was a follower. He would
Mm-hmm.
he would kind of go along with the crowd and everything, and like even with Caesar in the play, it makes it out to where he always tells the crowd to stay silent. You know what I mean? Because
Mm.
he doesn't want them speaking while Caesar's talking, and that would be what a follower would do because he's trying to be obedient to Caesar. So
Mm-hmm.
when he's around this crowd of people who are wanting to kill Caesar, what do you think he's going to do?
Mm.
He's going to want to be that follower who stands out and puts in the first jab. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So that's kind
Mm.
of my take on all that. So
Yeah.
I
How do
don't.
you see it, Otto? How do you
Well,
interpret it?
he did stab Caesar. He stabbed him from behind.
You know.
So a follower, right?
Mm.
But yeah, somebody who tries to curry favor. You know,
Yeah.
you can't like somebody who's like, quiet, Caesar's talking. Here's Caesar. Here's the really, you know, like the cartoon, like, yeah, Butch, what do you ever say, Butch? That's really good, Butch. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, look over there. Stab.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
thought that it was Sorry, carry on.
well, I was going to mention while we're talking about that, though, something I meant to bring up. One of the things I've read mentioned is, and this is something that isn't known as much to modern audiences, and that was in the play Julius Caesar. There's the famous line when he's struck down by the assassin. You know, the actor staggers around, and you know he's got like a couple dozen. You know, he's got all these knife wounds in him, and then finally the last in the play, usually Brutus comes
Mm.
up to him, goes to stab him, and Caesar looks at him and says, et tu, Brute? Then falls Caesar. In other words, and you, Brutus? Just the
Yeah.
shock of this. Now, the reason why this would be more powerful to an Elizabethan audience is because it was generally understood, and this is mentioned in the historians of the time, that Brutus was actually Caesar's illegitimate son.
Ooh.
This was seen, and in Plutarch, when he sees that Brutus is stabbing him, he covers his head with his toga and just lies down. That's it. He stops fighting back. Because when Casca first stabbed him, he tussled with Casca. Because Casca, even though he stabbed him in the back, apparently didn't stab him all that deeply. And according to so he's like tussling and he's fighting back and they're slashing and this and that. But when he sees that Brutus is going to stab him, he just gives up and he puts his toga over his head. And it's
Mm.
supposed to be his own son is striking him down. This would have been known to a lot of in the Elizabethan audience. It isn't mentioned directly in Shakespeare, but it was certainly mentioned in the sources. I believe it's in Plutarch, and I think it's in Suetonius. But yeah, so this was an added level to the violence
Mm.
that happened. That again, they would have been more known to an Elizabethan audience, who would probably be more conversant with Plutarch. Nobody reads Plutarch anymore, but they used to.
Yes. Another interesting thing, okay, that's sort of about one of the things that Shaw mentions is that he says that in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, Brutus plays the role of the villain. He isn't the villain, but all the things that a villain does in a drama
Yes.
happen because of Brutus's actions, which was so interesting to see that, to just pick that out.
Everything he does, he thinks he's doing for the best, but it drives the action towards greater and greater chaos and destruction.
Yes, yes. Which you then see in Mark Antony's speech at the funeral, don't you?
At Caesar's funeral, or at Brutus's funeral, when he's always popular at funerals, I guess. Where he says Brutus was the noblest Roman of them all.
No, I'm thinking about the one where he says, but Brutus was, what does he say? But man. Brutus is an honorable man, he says 3 or 4 times.
Yeah. But Brutus is an honorable man, so are they all honorable men.
Yeah, but see, the fact that he had to say it 3 times is what makes it important. Like, when you said something 3 times, that's almost like written in stone. You know what I mean? So that's the reason why he had to do that. That was the point. Like, even though he knows that what he had done, he also wanted people to see him as an honorable man. So he got up there and he said it 3 times. See what I mean?
Driving his point to the audience. Yeah.
Right.
And to they actually had very formal rules of oratory, speechifying that included, being able to. This was a way to drive something home. Who was it that said, "What I tell you 3 times is true," sort of thing.
Right.
He was also digging at them as well, of course, and. And thinking about Brutus again, with his everything he did what he thought was best, and he was able to, even though what he did was really wrong, he was able to rationalize, because really it's wrong to stab your best friend, possibly your father. It's wrong to engage in a conspiracy to overthrow the government and spark a civil war. These are not good things to do, but he was able to rationalize and say, no, this is the strong thing to do. It was almost like Shakespeare was making fun of the heroic, there's that whole heroic theme that the hero is headed for a downfall, but the downfall is the direct result of the strength of the hero, because the hero cannot act other than in this way. He contains the seeds of his own destruction. And you can argue that's the case with Brutus, but Brutus, I don't know, I get the sense that because he's always thinking about it and he's rationalizing. I mean, come on, Brutus, you're not supposed to be stabbing people in the Senate, but, he's able to sit there and have his head go through these loop-de-loops and say, yeah, it's okay. As long as we don't also kill Antony and we tell ourselves what good boys we are, it's okay for us to assassinate, the popular favorite. And the others are driven, obviously, by envy and by fear and by this and by that, and for Brutus, he has to do it simply because it is for the best for the state, and he's not going to be swayed by positive or negative emotions or anything like that. And I don't know, I get the feeling that it's forced. It's a forced meme on Brutus's part. He knows he shouldn't do this, and it makes it even heavier if you realize, like a lot of Elizabethans would have understood, that Brutus was Caesar's son.
Yes.
So.
I think one thing that really sticks out to me, though, is if you relate the story itself to actual history, it was kind of foolish because like there was even like a way that nobles in Rome were supposed to assassinate the rulers and stuff like. And usually what it was, if you didn't want to get into trouble with other people, is you contacted the Praetorians. And any civilized Roman would have a Praetorian assassinate the ruler rather than have nobles do it. You know what I mean? So
Mm.
you can kind of see the story being played out according to what they knew at the time compared to what actually was going on in the Roman Empire. You know what I mean? That's the thing
Mm.
that really sticks out to me. Uh, uh,
Mm.
so
It's interesting that that Bernard Shaw criticizes Shakespeare for writing a weak and indecisive Caesar. And then he himself writes a very idealized Nietzschean Caesar.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of what you said a couple of weeks ago, Otto, when you said everybody has their own Shakespeare. It's
Yeah.
almost as if everybody has their own Caesar as well.
Oh, certainly. Certainly. I think
Mm.
anytime you get a figure like Julius Caesar, um, if you're interested in things like military history or politics, or a literary figure like William Shakespeare, whoever that might indicate, or for that matter George Bernard Shaw, or any kind of historical figure, we tend to project our ideas onto them. Everybody has their own. Torquemada was a very devout Catholic, and his Jesus was very different from the Jesus of, say, I don't know, Saint Francis of Assisi.
Mhm.
And they each had their own Jesus, and they're both, revered in the church. I don't know if Torquemada is actually a saint, but that would be just Saint Torquemada. Maybe the next pope. We get a real traditionalist there, but you know what I mean. Certainly, Torquemada is regarded as a good Catholic by the church. I've never heard that they repudiated anything he did. So yeah, I think everybody's got their own. It gets back to the Buddhist idea of the mind comes first. We bring a lot to our perceptions, and when it comes to historical characters, we have a large screen to play with, and I think that can be very interesting, and especially from a literary point of view. If you're going to write about someone like Caesar, that means that you can have a wide variety of what writers see, and that reflects a lot of what the writer's bringing, but it can also illuminate different aspects of the historical Caesar. As long as you're sticking to the facts, there's lots of different ways to explain those facts or theorize about them, as long as you stick to the same facts. So yeah, he waged a lot of wars, chopped off all the hands of those people, and that after that siege, slaughtered his enemy there. How shall we look at that? What did Caesar think of it at the time? What did people think of it at the time? And again, this was the time of what we now call total war, but what they used to call Roman war. This was accepted Roman practice. He probably wouldn't be as upset about it as Shaw made him in the play, and I don't think Shakespeare even notices it, because it doesn't have anything to do with what he was writing about.
Mm.
But Shakespeare also wrote about military atrocities, like in Henry V. Where he shows the wholesale slaughter of the French prisoners. And
Right.
of course, in that play, it was mostly the concern of what's his name, Pistol, I think it was, who lost out on his ransom of his French prisoner that he was hoping to retire on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Couper la gorge.
I think one thing that really sticks out with Shakespeare is his refusal of the crown. You know what I mean? Like, and I'll go back to Casca because it's weird with Casca and his relationship there, because like Shakespeare, you know, makes it out like Casca apparently disapproves of Caesar's consolidation of power, but then again, he's always demanding silence from the crowd every time Caesar speaks. You know what I mean? So, that's what I'm saying. Like with Caesar's refusal for the crown, that right there is basically it suggests that political leaders like Caesar are nothing but like actors in on a very public stage. You know what I'm saying? And that he has a disdain for the regular folk. Like he doesn't want them to speak while Caesar's talking. You know what I mean? So that's kind of something right there. That it's aristocratic, basically, is what it is. For me, I think that's what he was really going after when it comes to the whole thing about Caesar and Casca. If that makes any sense.
I think he's definitely showing Caesar, like you're saying, as an actor, somebody who is performing with the crowd, because that's where he's deriving his power from. And the whole thing about being offered the crown and turning it down, every time he turned it down, they cheered even louder, because they're saying, oh, he's just a regular fellow, he doesn't want to be king, which was, again, their ultimate term. And but in the play, they're kind of ambiguous about that, because I think, as I recall, they noticed that, well, Caesar didn't seem all that happy that the crowd was cheering that he turned down the crown, and then it's like, maybe him and Mark Antony kind of cooked it up to see how the crowd would respond, and maybe they would cheer for him to be king, kind of deal, like testing the waters. And then remember, they got him out. One of the ways they tempted him to go to the Senate was, well, they're talking about voting you the ability to wear a king's crown just outside of the Italian peninsula, of course. That's like, hey, again, so his populism is shown to be maybe not as honest, that it's just an act for the people, and he's ready to go whichever way the crowd yells. And I think that's true of a lot of these guys. They are very, very aware, especially some of these people that they are, we look on as like these absolute dictators, really worry a lot about the populace, because they know how fragile power is. I think that's why Stalin executed so many people. He was really scared, and that's a sign of fear.
Yes.
It makes sense.
So do you agree with George Bernard Shaw then that Shakespeare wrote a weak Caesar?
Who, me?
Yes, you.
Oh, I don't think so. I don't think that's what he was trying to do, certainly. I mean, you could call him weak compared to George Bernard Shaw Caesar. I think he was a flawed Caesar, obviously. But I think that Shakespeare was trying to present a Roman politician who was held in great respect in Elizabethan times. They liked successful generals. They didn't have enough of them in Elizabethan times. They had issues with that. The weather did more good work for them than their admirals and generals sometimes. But he was shown to be, I think, like I say, a realistic politician. Shakespeare showed a little grayness. Didn't make him quite white, like the whole thing about talking about with the crown and being tempted like that. But I don't think he was. I think Shaw was thinking that, again, Shakespeare should have been a Nietzschean, even though Nietzsche didn't exist back then. That whole projecting his ideas backwards. Why didn't he show his Caesar to be more like my Caesar? Because even though Shaw himself lectured us about not projecting ourselves, he was also guilty. I remember he thought Britannicus a typical stage Englishman of today, would be a perfectly excellent way to demonstrate, or to present an Englishman from the time of Caesar. So I think he was kind of guilty of that. And if Shakespeare couldn't have read Nietzsche, he should have still known about these things, because obviously Nietzsche's ideas are universal, constant all through history, and blah blah blah. And Nietzsche simply recognized them. So no, I don't think he was a weak Caesar or an ineffective Caesar. He was certainly a more human Caesar than Shaw's philosophical idol there.
So one of Shakespeare's main areas of genius, if you like, is that he has been able to create these realistic characters that we can relate to 400 years later. They're these extraordinary characters that are true to that type of person. It's interesting to me that is what George Bernard Shaw criticizes. Is how Caesar is crafted by Shakespeare. Which do you prefer, Roger? Do you prefer Bernard Shaw's idea of Caesar or Shakespeare's idea of Caesar?
Well, I don't really choose either one of them, you know what I mean? Because, like I said at the beginning of the stream, I really don't like the Romans. But I think they're both good for the type of person that was interested in that certain style of writing, you know what I mean? Because, like, with Shakespeare, there's emotions, there's strengths, there's weaknesses, there's a character building right there, which a lot of writers today are against character building, in stories. But back then it was important to show, a character and their qualities and what they were, kind of give a little background on that character. So that's kind of what I see whenever you read something when it comes to Shakespeare and Caesar. Where with Shaw, he seems to take a more, in my opinion, it seems to be a more politically propaganda kind of situation, where he's trying to endorse Zoroastrianism and Sitchin's viewpoints and things like that, because like Otto said, during that time period there were a lot of things going on, not only politically but socially, which eventually led to some really horrible things, and that's as far as I'll take it on that, you know what I mean? But
sure,
those are the facts, you know what I mean? And it's sad that Nietzsche and his ideas and everything were vilified like they were, because he really did have a lot of good knowledge. And so either way that you look at it, it all determines what you're looking for when it comes to Caesar,
yeah.
So I couldn't say either or. It's two separate stories, like yin and yang, or
yes,
yin
indeed.
and yang. So.
Well, although I agree with you, Roger, I'm still going to continue in my question and pose it to you, Otto. Otto, despite the fact that we can't choose between them, which is your favorite?
It's really kind of apples and oranges as far as
She's getting nowhere.
Really the well, they each have their points. Shaw's Caesar is, again, he's funny. It's comedy play to a great extent, so it's a lot lighter in some ways. And you've got the whole Shaw lecture. He's basically like, Shaw standing up and lecturing the audience. That's what gets me about some of these Fabian books. It kind of spoils them for me. I don't care if you want to like introduce ideas or this or that, but at least be entertaining. And not that Shaw's play isn't entertaining, but that consequently just just from a literary point of view, I think makes his Caesar a little more one-sided, because he always has to have this position. Whereas Shakespeare's Caesar is, you see more of the, like I say, more of the works. And also Shakespeare was, again, he was writing a play so people would go and see it and pay money to go see it. It's probably was changed quite a bit from its original conception. We've talked about that before. These things were rewritten on the fly. And even though he tried to stick to the history that he knew, like I said, principally Plutarch, or this one English translation of it that he had, I think it was North's translation that he had available to him at the time, he's also going to be catering to popular, well, I was going to say superstition on the subject, which is basically what people, the urban myths and urban legends we have about people.
Yes.
That have very little to do with history. It's like George Washington chopping down a cherry tree. George Washington never chopped down a cherry tree, but you're going to put that in a play about him. People are going to enjoy seeing it, even if, and they might even know that it's not true, but they still expect to see it because it's part of. So if I'm going to go to a play just to enjoy myself and relax, then I'm probably going to like Shakespeare's play better. If I want to go to something that's going to lecture me and maybe be sophisticated and a little touch of Woodhouse and Oscar Wilde, well then, yeah, the Shaw might be the thing. But I think they're both trying to do different things, so it's not really fair to compare them as such. But I will say, I think Shakespeare's Caesar is a more grounded character. He's got dirty laundry there, and it's pretty clear.
Right, yes. Well, guys, that was another fascinating discussion. Thank you very, very much for being with us again and for your points of view. Thank you also to all of you who have been with us through this show. It's great to have you here. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for being with us. Please remember to like and to follow the channel so that you will know when the next one comes out, which will be this time next week. So thank you very much again, everybody, and we will be back again next week. But for today, goodbye.
Bye-bye.